Hello, students! Today, we are going to continue our exploration of the character of Mr. Utterson from Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Complete all Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde character lessons to earn a badge at the end. In today's lesson, we will be exploring the next of Mr. Utterson's key characteristics. We will focus on his repressed nature. In examining Stevenson's portrayal of Mr. Utterson, we will first explore how his emotional suppression reflects the rigid self-restraint demanded by Victorian society. Then, we'll analyse his avoidance of pleasure as indicative of his belief that indulgence is inherently sinful. And finally, we will consider how his profound sense of guilt underscores the psychological burden of maintaining strict moral discipline. Each of these aspects reveals the deep inner conflict Utterson experiences as he navigates societal expectations and personal morality. Ultimately, we will see how these themes contribute to the broader understanding of repression and its consequences in Victorian culture. Stevenson portrays Mr. Utterson as a deeply repressed individual, whose rugged countenance and unchanging demeanour reflect the emotional suppression and necessity for self-restraint enforced by Victorian societal expectations. We are told that Utterson has a rugged countenance that was never lighted by a smile, and never marked a shade of change in his demeanour. The description of Utterson's countenance as never lighted by a smile, and the absence of any shade of change in his demeanour, suggest a profound emotional repression ingrained within him. In Victorian society, particularly among men of Utterson's stature, the display of happiness or any form of emotional expression was often perceived as ungentlemanly and inappropriate. Instead, there was a strong emphasis on self-restraint, moderation, and the maintenance of a stoic facade at all times. This societal pressure to conform to rigid behavioural norms forces Utterson to suppress his natural emotional reactions, leading to a perpetually sombre and unyielding outward appearance. The absence of joy or any semblance of emotional warmth in his countenance reflects the toll of societal expectations, leaving Utterson emotionally stunted and disconnected from his own feelings. Indeed, his feelings are robotic and programmed, rather than the natural effusions of the human heart and mind. It is precisely this societal pressure which leads to the existence of Hyde as an outlet from these strict codes of conduct. Stevenson depicts Mr. Utterson as a profoundly repressed individual whose strict adherence to self-denial extends even to mundane pleasures, deemed socially acceptable rather than merely to those pleasures rooted in sinful pursuits. It is as though pleasure itself is considered a sin for Utterson. Evidence of this repression can be found in these quotes in Chapter 1. Though he enjoyed the theatre, had not crossed the door of one for 20 years, and drank gin when he was alone to mortify a taste for vintages. The revelation that Utterson had not attended the theatre in 20 years and resorted to drinking gin alone instead of indulging in fine wines underscores the extent of his repression. Despite these activities being considered relatively innocuous by Victorian standards, Utterson refrains from engaging in them as part of his self-imposed discipline. His avoidance of the theatre, a common source of entertainment for many, and his choice of gin over wine suggest a deep-seated aversion to any form of pleasure or enjoyment, regardless of its moral implications. For Utterson, the mere pursuit of pleasure, whether innocent or not, is regarded as sinful and indulgent, reflecting his rigid commitment to self-denial and his unwavering adherence to Victorian ideals of propriety and moderation. Stevenson portrays Mr. Utterson as a man haunted by even the slightest moral transgressions, despite his relatively blameless past. We see this as Utterson reflects in Chapter 6. His past was fairly blameless. Few men could read the roles of their life with less apprehension. Yet he was humbled to the dust by the many ill things he had done, and raised up again into a sober and fearful gratitude by the many he had come so near to doing, yet avoided. Utterson's introspection about his past reveals a profound sense of guilt and self-reproach, despite the absence of any significant wrongdoing. His humility in the face of minor moral failings underscores the intensity of his self-repression and his stringent moral standards. The encounter with Hyde serves as a catalyst for Utterson's reflection, prompting him to confront the darker aspects of his own nature and the potential consequences of straying from the path of virtue. Rather than succumbing to feelings of pride or superiority, Utterson is humbled by the realization of how easily he could have veered off course. This experience deepens his appreciation for the self-discipline and restraint that have guided his life, instilling in him a profound sense of gratitude for the moral boundaries he has maintained. Through Utterson's introspection, Stevenson highlights the psychological toll of repression and the complex interplay between guilt, gratitude, and self-control in shaping one's moral character. And that brings us to the end of today's lesson, students. We looked at how Mr. Utterson represses his emotions due to fear and stigma of being perceived as ungentlemanly. He avoids innocent pleasures such as the theatre and gin, suggesting an aversion to any form of pleasure. Lastly, we looked at how he feels guilty over minor moral failings due to Victorian society's strict standards. Through these three examples, we saw how his character is shaped by the pressures to conform. Remember to keep revising this lesson and see you next time.